On a night when the wind sounds like something alive and hungry, prowling across the empty ice and clawing at every crack in the wood, you step into a Viking longhouse and discover that warmth, here at the edge of the world, is not a luxury at all, but a carefully crafted miracle woven from smoke, fur, wood, and breath, a fragile bubble of life that somehow keeps whole families sleeping peacefully, while winter tries to erase them just beyond the door. You settle in, just inside the threshold, letting the heavy door fall shut behind you, with a dull, reassuring thud, and at once the sound of the storm is softened, as if someone has pressed a pillow over its mouth, the roar of the wind becoming a distant murmur, while the world inside wraps itself around you in layers of dim orange light and drifting smoke, and it takes your eyes a few moments to adjust before you begin to notice the details, the low curved ribs of oak overhead, like the bones of some beached sea creature, the thick turf roof that turns this place into half house, half hill, and the way the air, though smoky and heavy with the smell of animals, wool, wood resin, and cooked fat, feels strangely safe and sleepy rather than suffocating, as if this rough wooden hull has sailed through 1,000 winters already and knows exactly how to keep its passengers alive. Tonight you and I are going to fall asleep in that hull, moving slowly through the secrets that kept the Vikings from freezing to death, not with dramatic battles or roaring feasts, but with quiet, patient tricks of warmth. And as you listen, you might feel your own room growing a little softer, your own blankets a little heavier, until the line between their winter and yours begins to blur, and the longhouse feels as close as the edge of your pillow. You walk deeper into the hall, your boots sinking slightly into the packed earth floor that has been trampled flat by years of footsteps, and the first thing you really feel is not the heat, which is modest and gentle rather than blazing, but the way the cold has been pushed back, just far enough to let the body relax, the kind of warmth that doesn't make you sweat, just loosens that tight invisible fist tucked between your shoulders, and as you stand there breathing in the mixed scent of smoke, tallow, damp wool, and pine, you begin to understand that this is not a room in the modern sense, but a living thing, a wooden creature that has learned how to breathe in winter. Tall posts of oak stand along the length of the hall like ribs, darkened by soot and age, and between them the walls are built from overlapping planks, packed with moss, straw, and clay, every gap carefully stuffed so that the wind, no matter how it howls outside, can only whine faintly at the edges instead of sinking its teeth into the sleeping bodies inside. The ceiling is low, lower than you expect, forcing even tall men to bow their heads slightly as they move, and that too is deliberate, because heat rises and the Vikings understood, whether by instinct or long trial and error, that a room that tries to be grand and tall in this climate is a room that bleeds warmth straight into the night sky. So instead the longhouse crouches low against the storm like a patient animal, its back covered in thick turf now buried under snow, its sides hugged by drifts that look as if they might crush it but actually insulate it, each layer of earth and frozen white, trapping the precious heat that seeps out from the single central hearth. You move closer to that hearth now, a shallow pit of glowing coals with a few carefully arranged logs burning with quiet confidence rather than theatrical flames, and you feel the temperature climb with each step, not sharply but in a slow, steady gradient, the way a bath warms you as you sink in inch by inch, until your cheeks prickle gently and your fingers begin to forget their stiffness. There is no chimney, only a small vent in the roof ridge where the smoke curls up in thick grey ribbons, pooling beneath the rafters like a second ceiling, and at first you cough a little, eyes stinging, but after a few breaths your body adjusts and you notice what the Vikings knew very well, even if they never wrote it down, that smoke is not just a nuisance here, it is a blanket hanging under the roof, slowing the escape of heat, lining the beams with soot that over years seals the wood and makes it more resistant to damp, rot, and insects, so that the house itself is preserved by the very fires that warm it. Around the hearth, the life of the house arranges itself in quiet circles, not chaotic but deeply habitual, people moving with the calm of long practice. On one side, a woman sits mending a tunic by firelight, her needle flashing briefly whenever it catches the glow, bare feet tucked under her on a bench covered with reindeer hide, and the fur beneath her looks rough and wild. But when you brush your fingers over it, you feel the dense spring of the hairs and the dry stored warmth they hold, the same warmth that, later, will be wrapped around ankles and shoulders on the sleeping platforms along the walls. Near her, a dog lies curled tight like a comma, nose tucked under its tail, occasionally twitching in its sleep, and even this small body is part of the invisible heating system of the hall, one more breathing creature contributing a little warmth to the shared climate under the turf roof. As your eyes adjust to the dimness, you start to make out the sleeping platforms themselves, long wooden shelves running down either side of the hall, raised just enough above the floor to escape the ground chill, each one covered with layer upon layer of hides and wool, fox and sheep and reindeer, some still carrying the faint marks of rain and snow, some stiff with old smoke, and you can imagine how, when night deepens, people will lie down shoulder to shoulder there, children tucked toward the center, elders nearer the door, everyone wrapped in overlapping blankets like the shingles of a roof, turning their collective body heat into one broad river of warmth that flows slowly between the walls until the longhouse itself seems to breathe in time with the sleepers. At the far end of the hall, a hanging wool curtain marks the boundary between the human space and the beer, the animal section, and even from here you can smell it faintly, a mixture of hay, manure and warm hide, earthy rather than foul, a reminder that beyond that simple wooden partition, cows and goats are standing or lying on their own straw, their bodies also radiating heat that rises through the timber and seeps into the human sleeping area like an invisible tide. It is a strange partnership by modern standards, but here it is, simple physics, a shared survival arrangement where man and beast become parts of the same heating system, living elements in an equation that keeps frost from forming on the rafters and breath from freezing in the air. You sit when someone pats the bench beside them in quiet invitation, and as you settle onto the reindeer hide you feel how the house has been designed to gather and hold every possible scrap of warmth, from the slope of the floor toward the hearth where spills and melted snow can dry instead of soaking into the bedding, to the tiny low doorway you came through, small enough that each person must bow as they enter, either out of respect or simply to keep the Arctic wind from charging in with them. The walls around you are not smooth, not elegant, but you can trace with your fingertips the packed moss in the seams and the dark streaks where soot has slowly painted its own protection. And the longer you sit there listening to the gentle crackle of the fire and the soft murmur of voices, the more the furious storm outside begins to feel like a rumor rather than a threat. In this first quiet hour inside the longhouse, you begin to understand the Vikings' greatest winter secret. That survival was never just about lighting a bigger fire. It was about shrinking the world to a space where warmth could be shared and kept, about folding life inward under a low smoky roof, until every breath, every animal, every layer of turf and snow and fur worked together in a delicate balance. And as your shoulders finally drop and your eyelids grow heavier in the dim amber light, you feel yourself being slowly accepted into that balance too, one more breathing body in a house that refuses to let winter win. As you sit there feeling the slow seep of warmth from the hearth reach your hands and face, your attention is drawn again and again to the fire itself. This small, controlled blaze in the very center of the hall that seems far too modest to be the only thing standing between all these people, and the kind of cold that steals the breath from lungs and stiffens fingers into claws. And yet it works, not because it is large, but because everything in the house is arranged around it with almost stubborn patience, every plank and beam and fur and body placed so that this little island of heat can spread as far as possible and linger as long as it can before the night steals it away. You watch the way the flames lick lazily at the split birch logs, the resin flaring briefly in small bursts of light before settling back into a softer glow, and you notice how the fire is never allowed to roar wildly or die completely, always fed just enough to keep a heart of coals alive under its blanket of ash. and someone you realize must always be thinking about it, even if only half awake, some light sleeper who knows, in an instinct older than writing, that if the fire truly goes out in the middle of a winter night, the chill will creep into every corner of the hall, and the work of the day will be undone before dawn. Archaeologists who have knelt by ancient hearths like this one, brushing away centuries of ash and soot, have found traces of different woods mixed together, birch and oak and pine, suggesting that the Vikings didn't just burn whatever came to hand, but chose their fuel with care, using quick, bright wood to start the blaze and dense, slow-burning logs to carry it through the long hours when most of the hall slept, and only embers remained. You can almost hear that logic in the subtle changes of the crackle, the way a sharper snap gives way to a deeper, quieter hiss as one type of log gives way to another, the fire shifting tone like a tired singer changing songs. Above you the smoke gathers in a restless, drifting ceiling, dark and soft-edged, and every so often a thin shaft of pale light from the roof vent catches it and turns it silver, a floating river of warmth and ash that stains the rafters black and makes the air feel thick but strangely protective. And as your eyes wander along those beams, you see how years of burning have turned them into something like charcoal sculptures, layer after layer of soot filling tiny cracks and pores, until the wood itself is sheathed in a kind of armor made from all the winters that came before. What looks dirty to modern eyes was for them something close to sacred, the visible memory of every fire that ever kept a child from freezing, or an old woman from waking up with ice at the edge of her breath. The first lungful of this air stings, yes, but the second feels less harsh, and by the third you have fallen into the same rhythm as everyone else, slow deep breaths that pull in just enough warmth and let the smoke glide past your throat without clawing too hard, the body adjusting in the way bodies always have when survival demands it. There is a saying written down centuries later, that smoke in the eyes is better than frost in the bones, and as your cheeks glow gently and your fingers begin to tingle with life, you understand why no one here would trade this hazy, imperfect comfort for the clean, merciless cold outside. Your gaze drifts back to the walls and the sleeping platforms that line them, those long wooden shelves that are less like beds in our modern sense and more like shared nests, carved and hammered into place by hands that understood the ground as an enemy when frozen and a quiet ally when properly tamed. The planks that form the base are rough-hewn but sturdy, raised just high enough to escape the damp earth where meltwater and spilled broth can collect and evaporate near the hearth, and on top of them lies a complicated, clever layering of materials that might, at first glance, look like a random pile of hides and cloth, but is in fact as carefully engineered as any modern sleeping bag. Underneath, where you can't see at first, they have laid straw, dried seaweed or soft moss, things that trap tiny pockets of air and wick away moisture, a primitive mattress that keeps the cold of the floor from creeping up into spines and ribs. Above that comes fur-thick reindeer hide with its dense springy undercoat, fox and sheep skins that still smell faintly of wind and fields, each one spread so that the warmest side faces inward towards sleeping bodies. And over all of that, woolen blankets, tunics and cloaks, felted and beaten until the fibers map together into a dense, almost waterproof fabric that holds heat in the way a banked fire holds light. You picture, for a moment, the quiet work that goes into preparing such a bed long before the snow falls, women at the loom weaving heavy cloth by the steady clack and thump of wood, hands stained from dyes made of bark and lichen and roots, then felting the finished blankets in cold streams and by the fire, beating and rolling them until they thicken and shrink into something that doesn't look luxurious, but feels like a wall against the night. Each layer of fabric in this hall carries the ghost of that labor, the hours of spinning, the calloused fingers, the murmured songs sung to keep the rhythm of the loom. And when people finally lie down on those beds, they are not just resting on hides and wool, they are resting on the accumulated effort of an entire household that has been preparing for winter since the first hint of frost kissed the late summer grass. When people begin to settle for the night, you notice something else that feels almost shocking to a modern eye, but entirely sensible here. Nobody really undresses. There are no soft cotton pajamas or bare arms left to the mercy of drafts. Only layers of wool and linen and fur tightened and tucked, as if everyone is dressing one last time for sleep instead of peeling clothing away. And you remember how textile fragments pulled from bogs and graves show thick tunics, leggings bound at the ankles, cloaks pinned across shoulders, often reinforced at elbows and knees with extra patches. These garments are not only meant for working and walking, they are part of the knight's defense, an armor of fiber and lanolin that keeps the body's warmth where it belongs. A man near the hearth simply lies back on the platform, still wearing his cloak, pulling another hide over himself with a practiced tug that leaves no gaps at the neck. His boots loosened but not removed, because he knows that if he has to get up in the cold hours before dawn to tend the fire or check on the animals, he cannot afford the time it would take to fight his way back into stiff frozen footwear nearby. A woman adjusts her child's layers with the same instinctive care you have seen in parents in every century, making sure no patch of skin is exposed, tucking the wool just under the chin, patting it flat, her rough fingers gentle as she seals in the warmth they have stored all day. Soon the platforms fill, and the true secret of Viking winter sleep begins to reveal itself, not in any single blanket or architectural trick, but in the way bodies arrange themselves in quiet, unconscious patterns, a kind of living insulation that has nothing to do with romance or privacy, and everything to do with survival. People lie close, shoulder to shoulder and back to back, children pressed between parents, elders curled nearer the edges where they can rise quickly if the fire needs tending, and even guests, those who wandered in from the storm at dusk, are given a place among them without ceremony, because the cold outside doesn't care about social distance or delicate sensibilities. It only cares about exposed skin and wasted heat. Medieval writers from milder lands sometimes described this habit with a hint of shock, remarking that northerners shared beds as easily as they shared bread. But here, in the dim glow of the longhouse, you can see how natural it is, how the combined breathing of 20 or more people, plus dogs and livestock just beyond the partition, lifts the temperature of the hall by a few crucial degrees. The air hums with soft snores and deep, regular breaths, a quiet chorus that wraps itself around your thoughts until you feel your own lungs falling into step with theirs. You shift a little on the reindeer hide, feeling the coarse hairs against your cheek, and you realize with a kind of sleepy awe that all of this, the smoke, the turf, the snow piled against the walls, the straw underfoot, the furs and wool and shared warmth, works together like the gears in some primitive, patient machine designed not to impress, but simply to keep the spark of life from going out between sunset and dawn. Nothing here is wasted, not heat, not labor, not even discomfort, because every sting of smoke in the eye, and every scratch of wool against the skin is part of the price paid to keep frost from turning breath into crystals. Outside, the wind may still be raking its claws across the roof, flinging snow sideways, trying to seep in through every seam, but the longhouse has already made its quiet reply, drawing people inward, lowering its ceiling, thickening its air, turning shared hardship into shared warmth. And as you let your head sink a little deeper into the folded cloak beneath it, listening to the slow, steady popping of the fire and the soft sighs of sleepers around you, you find that the night no longer feels like an enemy waiting at the door, but like a dark ocean on which this wooden creature floats, held aloft by nothing more and nothing less than the stubborn warmth of those tucked safely inside. The storyteller's voice settles into the warm haze of the hall like a second fire, low and steady, glowing through the smoke as naturally as the embers glow through ash, and you find yourself leaning forward without thinking, caught not by the plot of the tale alone, but by the way it moves, unhurried yet powerful, weaving itself through the air as if it were part of the winter architecture. His words seem to rise with the heat from the hearth, drifting upward in long ribbons of sound that mingle with the smoke beneath the rafters, becoming something shared, something breathed rather than simply heard. He tells of a winter so fierce that the fjords froze all the way to the horizon, of a lone warrior crossing the ice with only a torch and a half-finished prayer to guide him. And the hall listens as if these events are happening now, footsteps echoing on invisible ice just beyond the doorway. Children pull their furs tighter around their shoulders, wide-eyed but smiling, because fear inside a warm hall is a safe fear, a comfortable one, softened by the presence of so many bodies and the nearness of the fire. And as the story deepens, you realize you're not just watching an evening pastime, you are witnessing one of the oldest tools of survival in the north. For in the Viking world, the long winter nights were dangerously quiet. Days could pass with nothing but the howl of the wind, the moan of frozen wood, and the murmur of breath in the darkness. Too much silence could unravel the mind. Too much stillness could make the cold feel like a presence, something intelligent, something waiting. So the Vikings filled the darkness with stories. According to scholars who studied the oral tradition of early Scandinavia, these sagas were not simply entertainment but medicine, communal warmth made of words. A good storyteller could raise the temperature of a room, not physically but emotionally, pulling everyone together under a shared blanket of imagination and memory. Even the architecture of the longhouse seems to encourage it. The fire sits dead center, anchoring the space like a stage. Benches run the length of the room, curving subtly inward, and the low ceiling bends sound, catching every word and sending it rolling from beam to beam, until even those in the dim far corner can hear without straining. You sense it now. The hall is listening as much as the people. The storyteller's hands move through the smoky light, shaping mountains and storms in the air, and each gesture casts long shadows that crawl across the walls like the silhouettes of forgotten gods. His voice dips suddenly, becoming a whisper, and the hall grows still. Even the dogs lift their heads. The man pauses at the perfect moment, long enough for silence to bloom, short enough for suspense to sharpen, and then resumes with a laugh that breaks the tension like thawing ice. Laughter ripples through the hall in quiet waves, warm and relieved. One of the children leans against their mother, heavy-eyed but determined to stay awake. Another child on the opposite platform has already given up, sleeping with their mouth slightly open, breathing in slow fogs of smoke-warmed air. A woman humming under her breath begins to braid her daughter's hair while listening, her fingers moving in rhythm with the rise and fall of the tale. This is not merely storytelling, it is maintenance of the spirit. There are historical notes scattered in monastic writings and travelers' journals that describe evenings just like this, families and guests gathered around the hearth, while the youngest recited memorized sagas for practice, elders correcting them gently if they faltered. Every story told in winter was a lesson, a bond, a memory preserved against the forgetting cold. Some researchers believe that the sagas themselves grew out of these longhouse nights, shaped by the sound of wind outside and the crackle of fire within. Because when all the world is dark and frozen, words become heat. The man now shifts into another tale. This one lighter, a mischievous god, a stolen hammer, a ridiculous disguise, and the hall brightens again with low laughter. You can feel it warming you, loosening your shoulders, relaxing the tight places in your mind. This is how they survived not just the cold, but the endlessness of winter, by crafting warmth in every sense of the word. As his story winds on, your gaze drifts upward toward the rafters where smoke swirls in lazy currents. The firelight flickers across beams blackened by centuries of flame, and you begin to feel a slow heaviness in your limbs, not exhaustion exactly, but a kind of peaceful melting, the way snow softens in early spring sunlight. You lean back into the reindeer hide, letting the furs cradle your shoulders as if they've been waiting for you all night. The hall hums softly, the fire's heartbeat, the breath of sleepers, the storyteller's voice rolling like distant surf, and the cold outside becomes something unreal, a world fading at the edge of thought. Here, inside this wooden creature built of turf and timber and stories, you can finally feel sleep approaching, gentle and patient, like a warm hand settling over your eyes. And the tale continues, folding itself into the warmth, like one more layer against the endless winter. The storyteller's voice deepens into something slower and more melodic as the fire settles into a quiet red glow, and you feel the entire hall tilt gently towards sleep. The listeners no longer sitting upright with anticipation, but gradually folding into their furs, leaning against beams, against each other, against the warm weight of the longhouse itself. And as the tale shifts into a quieter rhythm, you realize that the purpose of these late-night sagas is not merely to entertain or to teach, but to guide the mind softly toward rest, to ease the transition from wakefulness into the drifting half-world where dreams gather. And so the man begins speaking of journeys not of warriors or gods, but of ordinary people traveling home through winter darkness, describing frost-covered paths that glow faintly under moonlight, the slow crunch of snow beneath heavy boots, the way the sky seems to tilt above the fjords when the northern lights ripple in green and violet ribbons across the night. And he tells these things the way one might stroke the back of a tired child, gently, repeatedly, until the edge of the tale becomes softer than breath. You listen to him paint the quiet parts of the north, the parts not found in sagas of battle. Fishermen pulling nets beneath a sky full of drifting ice dust, farmers lighting tiny lamps in windows, half buried by snow, travelers stopping to rest against boulders, warmed faintly by the memory of sun. And he speaks of the way winter simplifies everything into essentials. The color of smoke against clouds, the taste of cold water, the glow of embers reflected in a friend's eyes. And soon those images begin to settle inside you, like feathers drifting down in slow motion, softening each thought until the hall itself feels suspended in a warm, breathing stillness. He describes the distant sound of waves beneath a frozen harbor, the quiet moan of sea ice shifting under its own immense weight, the muffled footsteps of a lone wanderer, carrying a small lantern across a snowfield where even the wind has fallen silent, and you can almost see it, the faint circle of gold around his feet, the long shadow stretching behind him like a sleeping animal, the snow absorbing every sound except the soft whisper of the man's breathing. And as the image lingers in your mind, the warmth of the hall seems to rise around you like a tide, reaching your shoulders, seeping into the back of your neck, settling beneath your ribs with a kind of slow, liquid calm. Someone near the hearth shifts, not out of restlessness, but out of the instinctive search for a more comfortable place to dream, pulling another layer of wool over their chest, while their face remains lit faintly by the fire's dying glow. And you notice how the smoke moves differently now, drifting in long, lazy columns instead of being tugged upward sharply, as if even the air has grown drowsy, its current slowed by the weight of so many breathing bodies, easing into the rhythm of night. The dogs have curled tighter into their nests, paws twitching as they dream of forests and snow hares, and even the livestock on the other side of the partition have settled into a quiet, synchronized breathing, the kind of deep, slow exhalations that feel like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The storyteller speaks now of a place far to the north where winter never truly lifts, a place where ancient rock faces glisten with frost even in midsummer, and he describes how the people there say the northern lights are woven from the breath of sleeping giants beneath the mountains, their slow inhales drawing the colors down toward the peaks, and their exhales sending the green flames rippling across the sky. And though you know it is myth, the image settles into your mind so gently you feel no need to resist it. Because in this hall, wrapped in fur and smoke, myth and reality have become indistinguishable, each as comforting as the other. His voice grows softer still, like wind sliding over snow, and the hall listens with the same hush one gives to falling flakes. The tale now less a story and more a sensation, an atmosphere, a slow movement through quiet landscapes of mind and memory. He tells of how the snow can glow blue at midnight, how rivers freeze in shapes that resemble waves caught mid-crash, how even the coldest nights hold a quiet warmth in the space between two sleeping bodies, and you feel those images curl inside you like heat seeking its home. each one smoothing the sharp edges of your thoughts until they lie flat and still. You sense now the slow, irresistible pull of sleep threading itself through the long house, moving between beams, across furs, over shoulders and faces, a soft invisible fog settling onto eyelids and easing muscles into surrender. And as the storyteller lets the final line of his tale drift away into the smoky rafters, the silence that follows is not empty but full, filled with breath and warmth, and the deep shared quiet of a winter night, held gently in the arms of a wooden house that has learned over centuries to cradle human dreams as carefully as it shelters human bodies. The quiet that follows the fading cadence of the storyteller's last words stretches across the hall like a warm pelt being drawn gently over a group of drowsy travelers, and in that soft, suspended moment, you feel the entire longhouse exhale as one, the deep release of people who know the night has finally settled around them, not as a threat now, but as a blanket, thick and dark and steady, its weight softened by the glow of the hearth and the closeness of familiar breath. You ease yourself a little deeper into the reindeer hide beneath you, feeling the rough texture against your cheek and the faint warmth rising from the layers of straw and earth below, and you become aware that the different scents of the hall, wood smoke, damp wool, warm fur, peat, faint traces of animal hide, have blended into something comforting and indistinct, a single warm smell that seems to move through the air the way a slow tide washes over a quiet shore. Around you, the shifting of bodies grows softer, slower, each movement heavier and more deliberate, as if every person is sliding 1 inch closer to the deep stillness that waits just beyond wakefulness. A woman turns onto her side, her cloak settling over her shoulders in a gentle wave, while a child curled against her murmurs a sleepy word and then falls silent again, their small breath joining the steady pattern of exhalations filling the hall like a quiet, rhythmic chant. Even the livestock behind the wooden partition have begun to lull themselves into their own version of sleep, the slow thump of a hoof against straw drifting forward, like a heartbeat too large to belong to any human chest, a reminder that the warmth in this hall comes from many sources. Some you can see, some you can hear, some you can only sense in the gentle rise of temperature against your skin. The embers in the hearth pulse quietly, glowing with the soft intensity of a creature at rest, not roaring for attention now, but breathing heat into the room with calm assurance, each little pop of resin, barely loud enough to mark the passage of seconds, but steady enough to remind you that the night is being tended in its own slow, ancient way. Above the fire, the smoke folds itself into the rafters in long drifting sheets, dark as velvet where it thickens, pale as mist where slivers of moonlight filter through the snow-rimmed vent high overhead, and the beams themselves gleam faintly with centuries of soot, like old bones rubbed smooth by time and touched by countless winters. You stretch your legs a little, feeling the stiffness melt as another wave of warmth rolls up from the hearth, and your thoughts begin to stretch out too, no longer sharp or quick but long and loose, drifting into the gentle spaces between the sounds of the hall, the almost inaudible rustle of a wool blanket settling into place, the faint creak of timber expanding with heat, the soft hum of someone letting go of the last thread of wakefulness, the distant waft of a dog exhaling through its nose as it drifts deeper into dreams. Everything blends into a single soothing tapestry of sound, a woven lullaby made not of words or music, but of the simple, steady presence of other living beings, sharing the same air and the same warmth. Somewhere near the doorway, someone rises briefly to check the fire, their shadow stretching across the floor like a slow-moving tide, and you watch as they lean down, lifting a small piece of birch to lay gently across the glowing coals, the tiny flame that catches sending a ripple of fresh orange light along the beams, before settling back into calm. The person remains there for a moment, warming their hands over the new flame, their breath visible in the faint draft coming through the door's seams, and then, as quietly as they rose, they returned to their place among the others, the longhouse accepting them back into its shared warmth without a sound. Your gaze slides upward once more toward the rafters where the smoke twists in soft spirals, and for a moment you imagine that the longhouse itself is alive, breathing with the same slow rhythm as the sleeping families within it. Its turf-covered back rising gently toward the night sky outside, its timber ribs creaking softly as it shifts, its earthen foundations holding steady against the press of snow, and the thought feels strangely comforting. It is as if the structure, worn and ancient though it may be, has taken on the role of guardian, holding the storm at bay with every fibre of its being, keeping the cold outside where it belongs while nurturing a pocket of quiet life inside. As your eyelids grow heavier and your breath deepens into the same slow pattern you hear all around you, you feel the last sharp edges of thought softening into the dim haze that hovers just before sleep, and the images from the storyteller's tales, frozen fjords, wandering lanterns, luminous skies, begin to dissolve into the warm darkness within the hall, blending with the scent of wood smoke and the steady warmth of your own body, as if the world of the story and the world of the longhouse are merging into one long, peaceful dream. You let yourself fall gently into that quiet space, trusting the fire, the walls, the furs, and the presence of so many sleeping souls to carry you safely through the rest of the winter night. The longhouse settles into an even deeper stillness, the kind that feels less like silence and more like a great creature lowering itself onto its haunches for the night, every timber relaxing, every layer of turf and snow pressing down with a steady protective weight, and as you lie there feeling the warmth soak slowly into your bones, you become aware of how profoundly different this kind of night is from any modern one, because here the darkness is absolute, unbroken by lanterns or distant lamps or the faint hum of anything mechanical, and in that pure darkness the only light that remains is the soft, pulsing glow of the coals, tiny suns resting on a bed of ash, glowing with a patience that seems older than memory itself. Your breathing falls naturally into rhythm with the hall around you, inhaling the thick, smoky air that clings to your throat in a way that should be uncomfortable, but has already become familiar, exhaling warmth into the small pocket of space beneath your blanket, and with each slow breath the boundary between your body and the furs wrapped around you begins to blur until you're no longer sure where the warmth you feel is coming from, whether it is the fire, the hides, the wool, the people lying close by, or simply your own pulse echoing back at you from within the longhouse's smoky belly. Somewhere behind the partition, one of the cows gives a low, rumbling sigh, the kind of deep, resonant exhale that vibrates faintly through the wood and earth, and the sound rolls across the hall like distant thunder, softened by snow. It should be startling, but instead it feels grounding, as if the presence of such a large, calm animal, breathing steadily in the dark, adds another layer of security to the night. Another reminder that warmth here is shared by every living thing, human and creature alike, bound together in this fragile oasis against the winter that prowls just beyond the walls. The smoke shifts slightly with a slow, languid draft, and for a moment the air clears enough that you can see the faint line of the roof vent, a narrow slit crusted with frost, letting in a thread of pale, ghostly moonlight that falls directly onto the center of the hearth. The beam of light is so thin and cold, it looks like a blade resting gently against the coals, and yet instead of dulling them, it makes the embers glow even brighter, revealing the molten orange veins beneath the ash, veins that pulse like the tiny heart of a sleeping creature that knows how to endure long stretches of darkness without fear. You shift slightly, adjusting the layers over your shoulders, and as you settle into a new position you hear the soft rustle of someone turning on the opposite platform, the gentle scrape of fur against wood, followed by a faint exhalation as they sink back into the warmth. That small sound, barely audible in the thick air, carries with it a strange comfort, a reminder that you're not alone in this vast winter night, that the nearness of sleeping bodies has its own kind of gravity, drawing people into a collective warmth that no individual fire could sustain alone. Your thoughts drift to the snow outside, the way it must be falling in thick, silent sheets, blanketing the world in white, smoothing every rough edge, softening every sound, insulating the longhouse even further until the storm itself becomes part of the structure. An outer shell of cold protecting an inner shell of warmth. Layers of contrast wrapped around each other like the hides and wool you're lying within. You imagine the wind carving patterns along the drifts, the roof disappearing under a rounded cap of snow, the world becoming shapeless and soft while inside the house everything is held in gentle, steady balance. The fire pops once, a brief flare of brightness that illuminates the beams above, revealing for an instant the delicate lattice of soot that has accumulated over countless nights just like this one, and as the glow fades you can almost sense the history embedded in that darkness. The stories, the storms, the laughter, the fears, the endless winters weathered beneath this same roof by generations of people who relied on the same simple truths you're relying on now. That warmth is something built together, that survival is a shared craft, and that even the harshest cold can be held at bay when bodies breathe in unison inside a house that remembers. Your eyes drift shut, heavy with the kind of fatigue that feels soft and inevitable, and the world begins to dissolve into a warm blur, the crackle of the fire fading into a slow lull, the faint breathing of the hall becoming a steady hum, and as you sink towards sleep, you feel one last sensation, an almost imperceptible vibration through the wood beneath your cheek, the longhouse shifting slightly as the night settles deeper, the structure adjusting itself like a great wooden creature curling its limbs around its sleeping family. And in that moment, just before dreams take hold, you understand something simple and profound, that the Vikings didn't survive winter through strength alone, but through stillness, closeness, and a patient trust in the quiet warmth they created together, one long winter night at a time. Something shifts in the darkness, not loudly, not sharply, but with the gentle inevitability of a world turning over in its sleep, and the longhouse seems to breathe a little deeper, as though it too has slipped from wakefulness into dreams, the beams settling with soft creaks that echo faintly through the rafters, like the groaning of an old wooden ship resting on calm waters, and you find yourself drifting further into that same slow rhythm, your thoughts lengthening like shadows stretching across snow at dusk, becoming softer, quieter, more fluid with each passing breath. The air in the hall has grown noticeably warmer, the accumulated heat of so many bodies and animals rising steadily into the smoky stillness, and you feel it settling comfortably against your skin, wrapping around you like a heavy wool cloak pulled straight from the hearth. It gathers in the hollow of your collarbone, slips gently beneath your blanket, and spreads across your chest in a slow, reassuring warmth that makes your limbs sink deeper into the furs beneath you, until it feels as if the hall itself is holding you with a patient, ancient embrace. A subtle murmur passes through the sleepers. Someone sighs, another shifts. A child lets out a tiny half-whisper that dissolves into the fur at their cheek, and all these sounds weave together into a single soft tapestry of life. A chorus of breath so delicate that if you were outside, in the frozen night, you would never believe such gentle warmth could exist mere inches from a world of ice and wind. But here it is, steady and sure, proof that survival in this place is made not from roaring fires or grand effort, but from small, constant acts of closeness, repeated every night until they become instinct. Your mind drifts to the partition where the animals sleep, and you imagine them huddled in their straw-lined space, massive bodies radiating slow, dependable heat, their breath rising like steam into the cool upper air. You can almost feel that warmth traveling through the wood, through the floor, through the very ground beneath you, creating a shared climate inside the longhouse, as if the entire building is one great lung drawing in cold and exhaling warmth over and over, patient and unbroken in its function. The smell of the hall grows richer as the night deepens, the earthy scent of packed straw mingling with the sweet, resinous trace of pine from the fire, and beneath it all lingers the faint musk of animal hide and wool, warm, lived-in scents that somehow feel cleaner, safer than any sterile air you have known, because each layer of scent here tells a story of endurance, of nights endured like this one, of storms weathered, of families wrapped tightly together beneath furs, while winter pressed its weight against the walls. You shift again, though barely. Your body so relaxed now that movement feels more like a ripple than a change in posture, and the furs respond with a soft rustle, settling into the curve of your shoulder and hip in a way that feels almost intentional, tailored, as if countless nights of human sleep have shaped them into perfect cradles. The sound blends seamlessly with the quiet landscape of the hall, and you realize that nothing here breaks the calm, not the fire, not the breath of animals, not the settling of beams. Everything here exists in harmony, softened by smoke and darkness, and the thick air that hums with the promise of warmth. Outside, though you cannot hear it clearly anymore, the storm continues in distant waves, the wind dragging its frozen fingers across the turf roof, snow packing tighter against the walls, pressing every seam, every joint, every plank, until the longhouse becomes more tightly sealed than ever, its insulation strengthened by the storm itself. And for a moment you imagine the entire building buried in white, a glowing ember of life hidden deep inside a mound of winter, perfectly preserved, protected by the very force that seeks to extinguish it. Your thoughts drift slowly across these images, unhurried, slipping from one to the next as gently as the smoke drifting beneath the rafters, and as they fade into a pleasant blur you become aware of a faint warmth at your back. Not just the warmth of furs or blankets, but the subtle, unspoken warmth of another sleeping body, lying not too far away, one more heartbeat folded into the collective rhythm of the hall. And even though you cannot see them, the closeness brings with it a profound sense of safety, as if the simple presence of others is enough to anchor you firmly in the world, no matter how cold the night becomes. Your breathing slows further, growing deep and soft, mirroring the breath of the longhouse around you, and your thoughts grow lighter until they float like ash, carried gently upward by the last lingering currents of the fire. The darkness behind your eyelids grows warm, and your limbs feel heavier with each passing moment, sinking deeper into the furs as if gravity itself has grown kinder, softer, more patient. And then, just as you begin to drift over the edge of sleep, you feel it. The smallest, most reassuring sensation imaginable. Another log settling quietly in the fire, sending a faint glow of light over the hall, a brief pulse of warmth that touches your face like a blessing. And in that flickering moment you're aware, not intellectually but instinctively, that this place will hold through the night, that the warmth will last, that the storm outside will spend itself against walls that know how to endure, and that you are safe, wrapped in the living heartbeat of a house, built to resist the cold with every breath it takes. The minutes stretch out in a way that feels almost fluid, as if time inside the longhouse has melted into the same slow warmth that fills the air. And you lie there drifting just below the surface of sleep, aware in a distant, gentle way of the harmony around you. The quiet rustle of furs shifting under someone's arm, the soft rhythmic snort of a dreaming dog near the doorway, the low creak of a timber that adjusts its weight beneath the growing pressure of snow on the roof, and all of it blends into a single continuous murmur that travels through the hall, like a calm tide lapping at a sheltered shore. The coals have dimmed even further now, glowing deep red like the last traces of daylight lingering in the western sky, long after the sun has vanished, and the light they cast is so faint that it seems to exist more in memory than in vision, a soft glow that brushes along the beams above you and paints the edges of people's faces in barely their shadows. Yet even this minimal light is enough to keep the darkness from feeling empty, because it reminds you of the fire's patient heart still beating quietly in the background, a pulse of warmth that refuses to abandon those who lie sleeping under its watch. Your awareness dips and rises like a feather, drifting on warm air, and for a moment you sense the entire building responding to the cold outside with its own kind of sentience. The turf walls accepting the weight of fresh snow, the timbers tightening slightly as frost curls around them, the thick roof settling under its soft load until the drafts in the hall are muted even further. With each passing hour, the storm itself becomes part of the insulation, a paradox that feels strangely comforting, as if winter, in all its brutal force, is unknowingly helping to preserve the life hidden here in this smoky wooden womb. You can almost picture the world beyond the walls, the snow drifting silently through a sky heavy with clouds, the landscape transformed into rolling white dunes, where even familiar shapes disappear under smooth curves of icy powder, the fjord half frozen beneath a skin of shifting moonlit frost, and the wind carving long arcs into the drifts like the fingers of a giant tracing ancient runes into the earth. Yet none of it reaches you, not here, not through the dense warm air of the longhouse that has been thickened by breath, fire, fur, and centuries of habit. As you nestle your cheek a little deeper into the furs, the scent of smoke, lanolin, and resin fills your nose, rich, earthy smells that feel grounding, like the smell of earth after rain or wool after being warmed by the sun, and even these scents seem to nudge you deeper towards sleep, their familiarity soothing in a way that feels older than memory, as if your body recognizes them from some ancient instinctive corner of the mind, where survival is stored like a story passed down through generations. Someone in the hall murmurs a few half-dreaming words, meaningless but soft, and the sound rolls gently across the room, settling in the shadows without disturbing anyone. A moment later, the goats behind the partition shift in the straw, their small hooves tapping lightly against the packed earth, and the warmth of their bodies drifts faintly into the human sleeping space, blending into the gentle ecosystem of heat that sustains everyone within these walls, a warmth created not by wealth or luxury but by simple coexistence, breath beside breath, fur against wool, fire beneath smoke. The darkness grows thicker, but not oppressive. Instead, it feels warm, padded, like a soft blanket pressing gently against your eyelids, and your breathing slows further until each inhale feels cool and each exhale warm, a rhythm that mirrors the rise and fall of distant waves or the quiet rolling of clouds across a winter sky. Your body sinks deeper into stillness, your spine relaxing into the contours of the sleeping platform, your hands settling naturally against your chest as if molded by centuries of sleepers who have lain in this same position under this same kind of roof. Your thoughts drift again, not in sharp lines but in slow, wide circles, images blending into one another, the faint green shimmer of northern lights moving silently above a snow-covered sea, the soft glow of a lantern carried through a white forest, the gentle flicker of a hearth at dawn, the quiet strength of animals breathing in the dark, the ancient patience of timber and turf holding against the storm, and all of these drifting impressions fold into the sensation of warmth around you, until they no longer feel separate from the longhouse itself, but part of a single, unified world of winter, smoke, breath, and sleep. Your eyelids grow heavier still, your breath deeper and slower, and as sleep begins to take you more fully, you can feel the hall embracing you, not literally, but in the way its warmth sinks into your bones, in the way its quiet hum settles your thoughts, in the way the presence of others anchors you to the moment with a steady, reassuring gravity. The longhouse has become not just shelter but a companion, a gentle, watchful guardian that breathes alongside you, keeping the cold at bay while you drift further into the deep, dream-filled quiet that lies beyond waking. And just as the last thread of thought loosens, a soft crackle rises from the hearth, a tiny ember collapsing inward, and the faint glow it releases drifts across the hall like a final whisper, a gentle reminder that the fire still lives, that warmth still holds, that morning will come eventually even if the storm roars until dawn. And with that thought, warm and steady, you finally slip into sleep, drifting into the deep dark, held safely in the longhouse's ancient embrace. The night deepens into something so complete and velvety that it barely feels like time is passing at all, as though the storm outside has wrapped the entire world in a thick cocoon of darkness and muffled every sound beyond these timber walls. And within that cocoon the longhouse grows warmer, softer, almost womb-like, its smoky breath rising in slow currents that blend seamlessly with the rhythm of the sleepers nestled beneath its low, soot-blackened rafters. You lie there, drifting deeper into the furs, and your thoughts begin to dissolve into that same gentle haze, sliding into one another without edges, quiet and heavy as newly fallen snow. The warmth around you has taken on a different quality now, no longer a surface sensation, but something that penetrates slowly inward, settling into your bones like stored sunlight, and the longer you lie in it, the more it begins to feel like the hall itself is generating heat from some secret inner core, rather than merely holding on to the fire's fading glow. Perhaps it is the combined breath of dozens of sleepers, or the deep, steady warmth rising from the livestock behind the partition, or the insulation of the turf walls pressed tighter by the weight of the storm. But whatever its source, the temperature has reached that perfect equilibrium the Vikings relied upon. A warmth not hot enough to wake you, not cool enough to shiver, but balanced in a way that invites the body to surrender completely to rest. Your senses drift outward in small waves before sinking back again, and in one of those outward reaches you notice the faintest sound, a gentle brushing, like snow sliding off a roof, or the whisper of wool against straw, and you realize it is simply someone shifting slightly on the opposite platform, adjusting their cloak or curling their legs more tightly beneath their blanket, a movement so soft it barely belongs to the waking world at all. The rustle fades into the darkness almost immediately, swallowed by the thick air, and the hall returns to its perfect floating quiet. Even the animals have entered their own deep stillness. The cows no longer shifting in the straw, the goats no longer snuffling faintly at the scent of hay, their warm bodies now radiating a slow, steady heat that rises like an invisible mist through the wooden partition, merging with the warmth of the sleepers until the entire hall feels like a single sleeping organism. One breath, one pulse, one long exhale held beneath layers of fur, wool, turf, and snow. For a moment you slip closer to full sleep, your mind drifting to the edge of dreams where thoughts lose their shape and become moments, colors, sensations rather than stories, and you see flashes of winter landscapes under moonlight, the faint rippling green of the northern lights reflected in frozen streams, the dark silhouette of a longship pulled up onto a snowy shore, the glow of a lantern in a drift-covered doorway, all of them blending with the warm murmuring breath around you until you can't tell which images belong to your imagination and which belong to the ancient memory of the hall itself. The smell of smoke has become gentler now, faint but comforting, mixed with the lingering scent of peat, resin, wool, and the earthy air of straw and soil beneath the floor. Instead of stinging, it has softened into something warm and familiar, a kind of nocturnal perfume that speaks of safety and endurance, of nights exactly like this one stretching back through centuries, nights where storms raged, winds clawed at walls, and yet people slept peacefully inside these low-timbered halls, trusting in the wisdom of their ancestors' building, and in the closeness of those around them. Somewhere in the rafters, a tiny ember of soot breaks loose and spirals downward in a faint trail, disappearing before it touches the ground, and the soft, nearly undetectable movement pulls your mind just slightly back toward consciousness. You register the warm weight of your blanket, the softness of the hide cups beneath your neck, the shape of the platform beneath your body, and then, just as gently, that moment of awareness fades again as your thoughts slide back into the drifting current of half-dreams. Your breath deepens, sinking unconsciously with the slow, measured breathing of the sleepers around you, and it strikes you, dimly, distantly, how extraordinary and simple this shared rhythm is, how natural it feels in spite of its ancient strangeness, and you realize the Vikings did not survive these winters through force or fire alone, but through this quiet, instinctive synchronization of warmth and breath, each person contributing a small spark of heat that, when combined, kept the cold and darkness at bay. Outside, the storm continues to sculpt the world into deeper silence, pressing snow against the walls, sealing every seam, every gap, every place cold might slip through, and the longhouse accepts this burden with calm resilience, its timbers creaking softly as it adjusts, its turf roof thickening with winter's weight until the boundary between nature and structure dissolves entirely, leaving only a warm hollow hidden at the center of the storm, a fragile but unwavering flame of life within an ocean of ice. Your body relaxes completely now, surrendering to that warmth, your limbs growing heavy, your breath so deep it seems to rise from the very floor, and as your mind at last releases the final thread of wakefulness, the longhouse whispers one last soft creak, a comforting, familiar sound, like a hand settling over your shoulder, and darkness envelops you fully, warm and gentle and absolute. The longhouse sinks deeper into its own warmth, the storm outside becoming nothing more than a distant pressure against the turf-packed walls, a faint reminder of a world you no longer quite feel connected to, as though winter itself has been pushed so far away that it can only circle the edges of the hall like a prowling animal kept at bay by the glow of the hearth and the steady breath of those sleeping inside. You lie there, drifting in that warm cradle of scent and sound, and everything around you begins to feel slower, thicker, softer, as if the entire room has softened into a kind of dream before your eyes have even closed. The fire has diminished to its most delicate form, a few glowing coals nestled under their ash blanket, flickering with tiny pulses of light that seem less like flames and more like memories of flames, and that soft glow spills across the packed earth floor in faint reddish strokes, illuminating the sled marks left by boots and the subtle ridges of straw trampled into the ground. The shadows that remain are long and gentle, stretching across the sleeping platforms like dark rivers that drift so slowly they might as well be frozen in place. A low warmth rises from the bodies around you, the air thick with it, fragrant with the scent of wool, smoke, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs that hang in bunches from the beams overhead. Someone must have tied them there months ago. Thyme juniper, maybe yarrow, meant to freshen the air or keep pests away. Their sharp green scent softened now by smoke, until they smell not of plants at all, but of the room itself, folded into the longhouse, the same way soot has folded into the beams. The sleepers nearest to you shift slightly, their fur blankets rustling like soft waves rolling across a distant shore, and though the sound is barely audible, it feels immeasurably soothing. A quiet reminder of shared presence in the dim half-darkness. You can sense more than see, the gentle movements of bodies settling deeper into warmth, the faint lift and fall of chests under the layers of hides, the slight flutter of fingers brushing against wool, and the way each motion seems to ripple outward, touching the rest of the hall with the softness of a lullaby. Beyond the partition, one of the animals yawns, an enormous, slow sound, followed by a deep exhale that vibrates faintly through the wooden frame, and the warmth from their bodies lingers in the air like a steady, invisible tide that ebbs and flows between the planks. You imagine them there, nestled in straw, their flanks rising and falling with long, deliberate breaths, their quiet presence as essential to the night's warmth as the fire itself, and the thought adds a subtle, comforting weight to your own breathing. The cold outside is still searching for a weakness. It presses hard against the walls, carving ghostly lines into the snow, twisting through the air above the roof, before sliding downward in long, icy strokes. But every attempt to slip inside is softened by the layers of turf, moss, straw, and packed snow. The longhouse has collected over the winter. The structure has become less a building and more a hill, a small piece of earth borrowed from the land and hollowed into a cradle, and it feels that way from the inside too, as though you're lying beneath the surface of the world itself. Your breath grows a little slower, a little deeper, your body surrendering to the rhythm of the hall, and your mind drifts along the quiet currents of warmth and shadow. Fragments of thought begin to mingle with fragments of dream, flashes of torchlight flickering on snow, the soft gleam of starlight on frozen lakes, the silhouette of a figure wrapped in a cloak, walking through a drift of powder, so deep their legs vanished with each step, and each image fades gently into the next, without fully forming, like clouds dissolving into each other in a windswept sky. The smoke above your head has thinned into nearly invisible wisps now, swaying faintly with the smallest movements of air, and occasionally one of those pale threads spirals downward like a drifting feather before dissolving against the warmth of your blanket. You follow its slow descent with your mind's eye, letting your thoughts move in the same languid pattern, drifting downward, slowing, softening. Someone at the far end of the hall coughs lightly, a small sound, dry and quick, swallowed instantly by the thick air, and then all is still again, the hall resuming its deep communal silence, a silence so steady and peaceful that it feels less like an absence of sound, and more like a shared breath held in perfect balance. You feel your body sinking deeper into the hides, your muscles unwinding one by one, your mind beginning to release its last strands of wakefulness. And you realize the hall is doing exactly what it was built to do, holding you, warming you, lulling you toward rest, with the quiet patience of centuries. Just before sleep takes you fully, the longhouse emits a single low creak, a sound so deep and mellow, it feels almost like a voice whispering reassurance through wood and smoke, and the storm outside howls in the distance, muted by snow, softened by turf, unable to reach you. And then, finally, the darkness folds around you completely, warm and gentle, and the last thing you feel is the steady, ancient heartbeat of the house cradling you into sleep. The warmth inside the longhouse continues to thicken as the night settles into its deepest hours, and you feel yourself drifting along a slow, gentle current that seems to carry every sleeper with it, as if the entire hall has entered a single shared dream, its breath rising and falling, in a rhythm older than language. The furs beneath you grow softer with each passing minute, their coarse fibers warming under your skin until they feel less like hides and more like a cloud of heat pooling softly around your body, drawing you downward in an irresistible, comforting weight. The coals glow faintly now, buried beneath their blanket of ash, but even in their quietest state they radiate a small circle of warmth that spreads through the hall in soft, invisible ripples. You watch, or rather feel, those ripples move outward, brushing against the sleepers closest to the hearth before diffusing gently into the air, the warmth so subtle and even that it becomes impossible to distinguish where the fire's breath ends and the warmth of bodies begins. Above the hearth, the smoke has thinned to the lightest haze, drifting upward like a slow-moving ghost, its thread soft and luminous in the faintest glimmer of moonlight that slips through the snow-capped roof vent. The smoke no longer stings your eyes or throat. It has mellowed into a familiar presence, almost comforting, as if it too has grown tired and settled into rest, weaving a thin veil between the timber beams that crackle quietly under the weight of winter's grip. Someone nearby shifts under a heavy wool cloak, the movement so small and unhurried it resembles the turning of a page in an old book, and the sound blends effortlessly with the soft chorus of sleep around you. A child's breathing quickens for a moment as they turn in their sleep. A woman hums a half-formed note without waking. A man lets out a low sigh that dissolves into the dark, and all of it feels perfectly natural, woven together into a warm, constant tapestry of presence that reassures you in a way words never could. The animals beyond the partition remain still, their warmth rising steadily, silently contributing to the gentle cocoon that shields the hall from the cold. You imagine their slow breaths steaming in the dark, tails flicking occasionally in dreams, hooves shifting in soft, muffled thuds against straw, the heat of their bodies rising through the wooden wall like a patient tide that never breaks. You can almost feel the storm trying to press its way inside. Feel the wind push along the turf roof in great sweeping motions. Feel the snow against the outer walls thinning and thickening with the gusts. But no part of that biting cold reaches you. Instead, the weight of snow acts like another blanket laid over the house, pressing warmth downward, sealing in every breath of heat the hall has worked so hard to gather through the night. Your own breath has settled into a long, slow cadence, each inhale cool and thick with the scent of smoke and wool, each exhale warm against the hides that cup your chest. The rhythm feels natural, instinctive, even ancient, as though your body has tuned itself to the same tempo that sustained countless sleepers in centuries before you. With your eyes half open, you catch the faint outline of the rafters above you, their edges softened by the smoke-dimmed glow of the coals. The beams stretch upward like the curved ribs of a sleeping giant, each one darkened by centuries of soot, and in the dimness they look both immense and tender, like the protective bones of something alive that has curled itself around the people it shelters. Your thoughts drift slowly, no longer forming sentences or images fully, but blending into something warm and formless. A mixture of memory and dream where moonlit snowfields dissolve into the flickering glow of a hearth, where the scent of winter wind merges with the smell of burning peat, where stories told earlier in the night hum quietly beneath the surface of your drowsy mind like distant waves. The warmth deepens again, settling lower, spreading through your ribs and down into your legs, and your limbs go heavy in the way only true safety can permit. The longhouse responds with its own soft sounds, timbers contracting gently, straw rustling faintly beneath the animals, the door's latch shifting just a little as the wind presses against it, and each of these sounds feels like a note in a peaceful, ancient lullaby sung by the house itself. Just as sleep begins to finally claim you, a final, gentle creak travels through the rafters, resonating in the air, like the sigh of a great creature pleased with the quiet it has created. The coals glow once more, pulsing like a heartbeat under ash, and the hall breathes with you one last time. And then the warmth folds in completely, soft, heavy, unbroken, and the world drifts away, carrying you with it into the deep, dream-filled silence at the heart of the winter night. The night seems to lose its edges entirely now, dissolving into a long, velvety stretch of warmth and darkness, where time no longer moves in minutes or hours but in slow, deep pulses that drift through the hall like the quiet breathing of a sleeping creature. And you feel yourself drifting within that pulse, floating between wakefulness and dream in a way that feels effortless and strangely ancient, as though your body remembers this kind of night from long before you were born. The air has grown heavier with warmth, thick, smoky, alive, and every inhale carries the scent of wool, peat, and faint resin, blending into a kind of winter perfume that feels both grounding and soothing. A scent that reminds you not of danger or harshness but of shelter, of being held safely in the dark. It settles into your lungs the way warm broth settles into an empty stomach, bringing comfort with every breath. Somewhere across the hall, a sleeper shifts just enough for their fur blanket to fall slightly open, and you watch as another hand, half asleep, instinctive, reaches out from beside them to pull it back into place. Without a word, without even fully waking, that small, tender gesture feels like the essence of survival here. Not dramatic heroism, not grand strength, but quiet, unconscious care shared between people who understand that warmth must be preserved the way others preserve food or fire. The goats stir again behind the partition, but the sound is softer now, as if even they have grown drowsy, their warm breaths rising in faint white clouds that disappear almost immediately into the thick air. The slow rhythm of their shifting weight presses tiny vibrations through the earth floor, subtle enough to feel only when you're already half asleep, like the faint hum of ground beneath a tree swaying in the wind. A draft brushes the top of the wool curtain near the door, just the smallest fingertip of cold creeping in. But by the time it reaches your platform, it has been warmed by bodies, furs, and flames, until it feels more like a sigh than a chill. The storm outside thuds against the roof once more, but the sound is muted by the thick layers of turf and snow, transformed into a distant soft thunder that feels less like a threat and more like a lull, the sound of nature settling deeper into its own sleep. Your eyelids grow heavier still, and when you blink, the rafters above you seem to blur into long, curved shapes that resemble the hull of a ship gliding through dark water. The longhouse in this light feels less like a home and more like a vessel carrying you through the depth of winter night, rocking gently on waves of breath and warmth. You can almost imagine it moving, not literally, but in the slow shift of timbers responding to wind, in the subtle give of the walls as snow settles more tightly around them, in the weight of the sleeping families that lie within it like a crew surrendered entirely to the calm of the sea. The coals pulse faintly again, one small flare of orange glowing through the ash before retreating back into red, and that single flicker lights up the curve of the closest fur, the shape of a shoulder, the line of a jaw relaxed in sleep, the gleam of a wooden cup left near the hearth. Each object glows for a moment like something precious, illuminated briefly in the dark before sinking back into shadow, as if lowered gently into deep water. Your breath deepens, until it feels like it is part of the longhouse's own breathing cycle. Slow inhale, warm exhale, smoke rising, rafters settling, and your thoughts soften until they no longer form words but drift in hazy impressions. The warmth of a fire on a cold morning, the glow of embers under fresh snow, the weight of a wolf pelt across tired shoulders, the quiet contentment of belonging to a small circle of light in a world made of ice. Somewhere, perhaps very close, someone shifts their foot and brushes lightly against yours, just for an instant, a soft contact that reminds you again how closely knit the people in this hall sleep. How warmth is not an individual possession here but a collective one, shared unconsciously in the dark until it becomes impossible to tell where your heat ends and theirs begins. Your breathing slows further. Your body grows heavier, deliciously heavy, sinking into the furs, as if gravity has doubled its softness. The hall emits one last creak, a low, settling sound like a tree trunk easing its weight, and the storm outside answers with a long, muffled gust that fades almost instantly into silence. And in that silence you finally drift fully across the threshold of sleep, carried into the dark as gently as if the longhouse itself had leaned down to whisper that it will keep watch through the storm, that the cold cannot reach you here, that the night is long but your rest will be warm and complete. The night settles so deeply into the longhouse that even the shadows seem to fall asleep, softening into a dark so gentle it feels padded, warm around the edges, a darkness that holds rather than hides. And as you drift further into it, your awareness becomes feather-light, floating in and out of small impressions like a leaf, circling slowly on a calm pond. The warmth around you has reached that perfect stillness where nothing rises or falls sharply anymore. No sudden draft, no abrupt crackle of flame, just a steady, enveloping heat that feels like it has seeped into the very grain of the timber and the weave of the wool, as if the building itself has been warmed from the inside out. The coals in the hearth glow in long, pulsing breaths, faint but unwavering, each pulse illuminating the underside of the rafters, in a dim amber wash before dimming again, as though the fire were drifting in its own half-sleep. The beams overhead creak now and then with low, woody murmurs, the kind of sounds that feel less like movement and more like reassurance, as if the longhouse is whispering to itself that everything is holding, everything is steady, everything is warm enough to last until dawn. You feel the heaviness in your limbs deepen in increments so slow you almost don't notice it. Your hand settling a fraction deeper into the furs, your shoulder releasing a knot you didn't realize it held, your legs sinking into softness, as if the bedding has grown thicker with every minute you've lain here. Even your breath has slowed to a long velvety rhythm, each inhale cool with the faint taste of smoke, and each exhale warm as it curls against the hide beneath your cheek. Somewhere close by, a sleeper stirs not in discomfort, but in that small, instinctive movement of the body, searching for an even more perfect pocket of warmth, and the fur over them shifts with a soft slide that blends into the silence before you can truly register it. A moment later, one of the dogs lets out a small huff in its sleep, paws twitching once in some simple dream of running or sniffing or chasing snowflakes, and then it settles again, its warmth adding another subtle layer to the collective heat that fills the space like a slow-moving tide. Behind the partition, one of the cows shifts its weight with a deep, resonant exhale, the sound rumbling through the longhouse, like a gentle drumbeat far beneath the surface, a reminder that the warmth here is not only human but animal too, woven together in a shared rhythm of breath and rest that has sustained countless families through countless winters. That low rumble fades into stillness, but it leaves behind a feeling of stability so profound it feels almost like gravity itself. Outside, the wind continues to scrape across the snow in long spiraling currents, but it reaches you only as a faint pressure along the roof and the occasional mellow groan of timber settling under its touch. The storm is still out there, wandering the frozen world, reshaping drifts, carving patterns into the white, but it may as well be miles away. Here inside, the snow against the walls has thickened into an insulating shell, the turf roof has accepted the winter's weight, and the longhouse has drawn all of you into its warm, patient interior like a great wooden bear curled around its cubs. Your thoughts drift more freely now, slipping into soft, dreamlike images, embers glowing under fresh snow, breath-forming pale shapes in moonlight, fur-lined cloaks heavy on tired shoulders, a lantern glowing in the endless white, images that float together in warm loops without edges or sequence, each one fading gently into the next as your mind quiets further. The air grows thicker again, rich with the scent of wool and tallow and the faint sweetness of juniper and thyme that still cling to the dried herbs hanging in shadow above you. Each breath feels like drawing comfort straight into your lungs, and with every exhale you sink a little deeper, your body surrendering more and more to the warmth that holds it. Your eyelids fall shut without you noticing, the darkness behind them warm and soft, and the longhouse emits one final, settling sigh, a deep, full-bodied creak that rolls through the timbers like a slow pulse. The hall's breath mingles with your own, and you feel the entire space shift into a deeper quiet, a deeper stillness, as if the house itself has drifted into sleep with you. And in that moment, carried on the last gentle wave of warmth and silence, you finally sink, fully and peacefully, into the deep, enveloping sleep the longhouse has been guiding you toward all night, safe, warm, and untouched by the storm that rages somewhere far beyond the walls of this ancient wooden sanctuary. The longhouse seems to drift even deeper into its own heartbeat now, as if the entire structure, timber, turf, smoke, warmth, sleepers, has slipped beneath the surface of consciousness and settled into a vast, quiet sea of rest, and you feel yourself sinking with it, weightless and warm, cradled by layers of air and fur, and the soft pulse of heat rising from both fire and life. The coals have dimmed to the faintest glow, not bright enough to cast true shadows anymore, but still burning in tiny, steady points like a constellation fallen to the floor, each ember a miniature star pulsing with quiet endurance. Their light flickers across the edges of the nearest firs and wooden beams, turning them into soft shapes barely distinguishable from the darkness, and for a moment the entire hall feels suspended in a calm twilight, neither night nor dawn, but a timeless place where the cold outside cannot enter. Your breath joins the slow communal rhythm that fills the hall, a gentle tide rising and falling in waves, and the sound blends seamlessly with the quiet breathing of others, creating a harmony so subtle you don't truly hear it, you feel it, like warmth seeping through the seams of your clothing and into your bones. That rhythm seems to soften your thoughts as well, letting them loosen and uncoil until they drift like wisps of smoke through the dimness of your mind. A sleeper near you shifts again, just slightly, and their cloak slips enough for the faint warmth of their body to brush against the air between you, subtle and soothing, as if the night itself had reached out to gently tuck you further into comfort. You can sense the presence of others beyond them, figures curled beneath hides, shoulders rising and falling in long breaths, hands resting loosely against wool or fur, and the awareness makes the darkness feel gentler, friendlier, alive in a way that only shared warmth can make it. The dogs have settled fully now. One gives a tiny whine in its sleep, paws twitching in some silent dream of snow or hunting, then falls still again with a soft exhale that mixes with the haze in the air. The goats behind the partition let out a low, barely there rumble as they shift deeper into their straw beds, their warmth rising like another wave into the hall. It's astonishing how clearly you can sense the difference between the warmth of the fire the warmth of bodies, and the warmth of animals, each with its own texture, its own steady presence, all layered together so seamlessly they become one cloth of heat stretched over the night. Outside, the storm continues its patient assault against the world, sweeping snow in long, icy currents across the frozen ground. But the sound has softened into a distant murmur, a muffled roar dulled by the thick, snow-laden walls. It's as though the storm itself has grown tired, its energy dampened by the weight of winter. What once sounded sharp and biting now feels far away and harmless, a wandering creature unable to penetrate the sanctuary you've found within these timbered walls. The longhouse responds with its own dim language, timbers settling in slow groans, the turf roof tightening under its snowy blanket, the straw beneath the animals rustling in soft, rhythmic shifts. Every sound is subtle, familiar, almost tender, like the small noises a sleeping person makes as they adjust themselves, not fully waking, but acknowledging the world around them in a half-conscious murmur. Your thoughts slow further still, becoming less like words and more like sensations, the weight of a wool cloak across your chest, the warmth of fur cupping your shoulder, the faint tingling in your fingers as they relax, the slow cooling of the air right above your face where breath mixes with smoke. Even the darkness has softened into something warm and textured, not empty but full of bodies, breath, safety and memories etched into the walls by centuries of winters just like this. Your eyelids drift shut again, and this time they stay closed. The longhouse gives one more soft creak, a sound that feels almost like a hand smoothing a blanket over you, and the warmth around you deepens in response, settling like a heavy, gentle wave across your body. The last thing you sense before sleep fully claims you is the quiet unity of the hall, dozens of breaths rising and falling, the slow pulse of cows and goats on the other side of the partition, the faint glow of dying coals, the deep hum of timber holding strong against the weight of the storm. Then you drift, slowly and completely, into the warm, deep sleep that the longhouse has been guiding you toward all along, a sleep wrapped in wool and fur and centuries of winter wisdom, safe beneath the wooden ribs of a shelter built not just to block the cold but to cradle every soul within it. The longhouse drifts into a silence so perfect, it no longer feels like quiet but like a soft, living blanket stretched across every beam, every sleeper, every breath, a warm hush that settles over the hall, with the gentle certainty of snow falling onto frozen ground. You lie deep within that hush, wrapped in a cocoon of furs and wool, and the world around you feels slower, heavier, more distant, as though the storm outside belongs to another realm entirely, one that has no power to touch you now. The embers in the hearth have faded into a faint red glow, barely visible beneath their fine layer of ash. Yet their warmth lingers in the air like the last pulse of a heartbeat. The glow deepens and softens with each slow breath of the hall, flickering gently through the haze and illuminating the nearest sleeping faces with a dim golden warmth that seems to hover more in memory than in light. Every few moments a tiny crackle whispers through the embers, a soft, almost apologetic sound, before the quiet folds over them again. Your body has sunk completely into the furs now, their coarse fibers warmed by hours of shared heat, until they feel like the thick pelt of some gentle animal cradling you. The hides beneath you shift just enough to mold themselves to the curves of your ribs, your shoulders, your hips, and that sensation of being held, supported, sheltered, deepens your drowsiness until it becomes almost impossible to tell where your body ends and the bedding begins. A sleeper beside you exhales softly, their breath warm and slow, a faint brush of heat that drifts across your cheek like a passing cloud. You don't turn toward them. You don't need to. Because in this room, closeness is not a choice, but a natural law, a gentle truth shaped by necessity and centuries of instinct. Their warmth is your warmth. Their breath blends with yours. Their stillness anchors your own drifting mind. From behind the wooden partition comes the slow, steady breathing of cows resting in straw. One of them shifts its weight just slightly, producing a soft, deep rustle, the sound of hooves brushing straw, of a heavy body finding an even more comfortable angle in the dark. And even that distant animal sound rolls across the hall like a lullaby, deep and reassuring, a reminder that warmth is a shared effort here, woven together from every creature under this long wooden roof. Outside, the wind moans along the roof in long, tired arcs, the sound blunted by the thick snowdrifts piled high along the walls. The storm has softened, its rage mellowed into a slow, steady exhalation that slides past the rooftop like distant surf. Instead of sharp gusts, you hear only the gentle brushing of snow shifting in the night, a soft cascading whisper, like powdered sugar sliding down the curved sides of a bowl. Even the blizzard seems to have grown drowsy, entranced by the stillness of the world it's blanketing. Your thoughts become smaller, simpler, quieter. They arrive like faint sparks, glimpses of moonlight on frozen lakes, the soft glow of lanterns behind snow-touched windows, the warm weight of cloaks resting across shoulders, and then dissolve again before they can form into anything more. The cold world outside fades from your awareness entirely, as though the longhouse has gently closed the door between you and the elements, and whispered that you may rest now, truly rest, without watching for danger, or shivering through the night. A tiny ember shifts in the hearth, flipping over with a soft crackle, and the momentary glow it casts seems to highlight the shape of the rafters above you, their curved beams blackened by centuries of smoke, arching like the ribs of a slumbering creature, wrapped protectively around everyone beneath. In that faint light, the longhouse feels less like a building and more like a living being, its breath slow and deep, its body warm with shared life. You inhale again, slow and steady, the air thick with warmth and the faint perfume of peat and dried herbs. Your chest rises, then sinks, and the movement feels so natural, so peaceful, that for a moment you drift in the sensation completely, weightless and untethered. The darkness behind your closed eyelids grows softer, hazier, and the last bit of tension unwinds from your muscles, so smoothly it feels like the night itself has lifted it away. The longhouse gives one final, gentle groan, a low, contented sound rolling through the timber, as if acknowledging the deep sleep settling over every soul inside, and then everything becomes perfectly still, perfectly warm, perfectly quiet. And in that deep, timeless quiet, you finally let go, sinking into a sleep so complete and heavy that it feels less like drifting into dreams and more like being welcomed into a centuries-old embrace, the kind of sleep only a Viking winter can shape, beneath a roof built to endure, beside hearts built to share warmth, in a world wrapped entirely in snow and silence. The longhouse holds the night so gently now that it feels almost suspended outside of time, wrapped in an unmoving hush so deep and warm. It's as though the world itself has paused to rest alongside you. The darkness has softened into a thick, velvety cocoon, warmed from within by bodies, furs, breath, and the faintest lingering glow of the hearth. And that cocoon presses close around you, not heavy, not confining, but comforting, like being held inside a memory of safety so old it goes beyond language. Your thoughts move lazily now, drifting like dust motes through sunbeams, though there is no sun here, only the slow pulse of faint ember light glowing beneath the ash. That soft glow ebbs every few heartbeats, flickering weakly, but each flicker spills a warm amber ripple across the nearest hides and faces, revealing for an instant the softened contours of cheeks, the curve of a shoulder beneath a fur, the outline of a hand resting gently atop another. Every shape illuminated by that momentary light feels serene, smoothed by the calm of deep sleep. Somewhere beside you, someone shifts just slightly, a small movement beneath layers of wool, barely enough to disturb the bedding. The rustle is soft like the sound of wind stirring grass, and fades quickly into the warm fog of quiet that fills the hall. Another sleeper sighs, their breath carrying a faint warmth that brushes your arm and then mingles with the smoky air. Every sound is small and soft, and each one seems to ripple outward before dissolving into the collective stillness. Even the animals behind the wooden partition have surrendered to the night completely. The cow's breathing is deep and slow, so steady that it feels like the low thrum of the earth itself breathing through the longhouse floor. Occasionally one shifts in the straw, producing a deep, muffled rustle that vibrates lightly through the ground and up through your furs, but the movement is gentle, rhythmic, as if even the heavy beasts have settled into the ancient song of winter rest. The storm outside has become a distant murmur, its sharp edges worn away by snow and darkness, until it sounds like little more than a long, slow exhale curling around the roof. The wind no longer claws or rattles, it drifts, glides, and slides along the turf like a weary traveller brushing past the walls. The thick layers of snow have softened everything, muffling the world until even the raging cold outside feels small, remote, powerless. The longhouse has become a world unto itself, a pocket of warm breath suspended inside the storm's wide silence. The air around you is warm and thick, smelling of wool, wood ash, peat, and the faint sweetness of dried herbs hanging somewhere above you in bunches. Each breath you take fills you with that warm mixture, and each exhale releases it again into the soft, smoky haze. Your breathing is slow now, long and heavy, blending almost perfectly with the layered rhythm of the hall, the rise and fall of dozens of chests, the faint murmur of straw shifting, the subtle creak of rafters adjusting to the night's weight. Your eyelids drift closed again, and for a moment, just before sleep folds over you fully, you catch the faint outline of the beams above, blurred and softened by smoke. They curve like protective ribs overhead, the soot-darkened wood glowing faintly where the embers catch it, and that fleeting glimpse fills you with a feeling you can't quite name, something like gratitude or belonging or the deep, wordless trust that comes from knowing you are warm in a place built for surviving the cold. You sink deeper into the furs, the warmth pooling around your legs, your chest, your hands tucked beneath the hides. Time loses its meaning here. Breath is the only clock. Breath and heartbeat. Yours. The halls. The animals. All of them together creating a soft, slow orchestra of life that hums quietly beneath the darkness. The long house gives a single, deep, settling creak, long and low, like a wooden giant stretching before sleep, and that final sound melts seamlessly into silence, a silence so complete it feels like a blanket being tucked over the very last waking thought in your mind. And with that gentle sound, the last thread of wakefulness fades, and you slip into sleep entirely, warm, safe, wrapped in centuries of winter wisdom, embraced by the soft breath of the hall, while outside, the snow continues to fall, soft as whispers, silent as dreams. The warmth inside the longhouse has settled into its deepest, most unmoving state now, a dense and gentle heat that seems to float just above the floor and wrap itself around every sleeper like an unseen blanket. And as you lie there, your breath grows so slow, and even that it begins to match the rhythm of the hall itself, a rhythm so steady and ancient it feels less like a place and more like a living presence keeping watch around you. The coals under the ash barely glow anymore, reduced to faint red veins pulsing quietly in the darkness, like the last traces of daylight clinging to the edges of a winter sky. Yet even without flame, the warmth remains, stored in the furs, in the walls, in the bodies around you, in the thick turf roof pressing downward with its insulating weight of snow. The heat feels perfectly balanced, neither rising nor fading, just hovering in the air like a promise the night intends to keep. A soft exhale drifts from someone nearby, warm enough that you can feel the faint brush of it against your arm before it mingles with the smoky air. The sound is small, almost delicate, a reminder that sleep here is not solitary but shared, woven together through the quiet nearness of bodies lying shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, heartbeat to heartbeat. That closeness creates a comfort deeper than simple warmth. It feels like belonging, like joining a rhythm older than memory. The dogs have curled into tight balls near the foot of the platform, their fur brushed faintly by the ember glow. One of them gives a tiny grunt in its sleep, paws twitching once as if chasing something in a dream, then relaxes again, its warmth spilling gently into the air. The goats and cows beyond the partition have stopped shifting entirely now. All that remains is their slow, deep breathing, a soft, steady vibration that hums faintly through the straw and wood. It feels like the heartbeat of the earth itself is pulsing through the hall. Outside, the wind drifts past the walls in long, tired sighs, no longer howling or clawing, but rolling softly through the snow like a blanket being shaken out over the frozen world. Each gust presses against the turf roof and then fades away into stillness, and with every one you feel the longhouse settle more deeply into its foundation, sinking into the storm the way a sleeping animal burrows deeper beneath its own fur. Your eyelids fall heavier and heavier with each breath, and your thoughts melt into the warm haze filling the room. Images float through your mind without edges. Snow glowing blue under moonlight, the soft curl of smoke rising from a hearth, the curve of a horn cup half filled with mead, the silhouette of fur-lined cloaks hanging near the fire, all blending into one long, slow drift of impression and warmth that soothes you deeper into rest. The air is thick but breathable, heavy with soot and wool, and the sweetness of dried herbs hanging somewhere above you, sage, thyme, maybe juniper, mixing with the scent of warm earth from the packed floor. Breathing it feels like inhaling a story, a memory of winters survived by breath and fire and quiet closeness. Each inhale is a gathering of warmth. Each exhale sends a soft, invisible ripple into the haze above. A sleeper on your left shifts just enough that their shoulder brushes yours through the layers of fur, a faint, instinctive gesture seeking a slightly warmer hollow of bedding. You can feel their heat through the thick wool, steady and calm, and the contact roots you even deeper into the softness beneath you. The longhouse is so quiet now that even that small movement feels like part of the room's natural language, a whisper of sleep shared between companions who need no words. Above you, the rafters hold the last traces of ember light, glowing faintly at their edges as though etched by the memory of fire. They stretch upward like the dark ribs of a slumbering beast, embracing everyone beneath them with slow, protective breath. A faint creak runs along one beam as the storm outside shifts, but it's a gentle sound, almost affectionate, like the hall adjusting its posture to keep the warmth tucked in. Your last coherent thought dissolves into that creak, carried off by its slow, wood-warm vibration, and the darkness behind your eyes grows deeper and softer until it feels like sinking into warm snow, thick, quiet, and endlessly gentle. Then the hall gives one final, soft sigh, timber, earth, straw, breath all settling into perfect harmony, and with that, sleep wraps around you completely, a warm, ancient cloak that shuts out the cold and carries you effortlessly into the quiet heart of the Viking night. The longhouse drifts into a stillness so complete that it feels less like silence and more like the world has sunk into a warm, fur-lined pocket of eternity, a place where nothing sharp or cold or hurried can exist, and you float inside that pocket with the effortless ease of someone being gently rocked in a cradle made of darkness and breath. The warmth around you has deepened into something almost physical, like a soft weight pressing lightly against your skin, settling over your chest and arms and legs, until your entire body feels cocooned in a kind of ancient living comfort. The embers at the hearth pulse only faintly now, tiny hidden sparks buried beneath ash, but those sparks still send out thin ribbons of warmth that drift across the floor in slow, invisible waves, rising just enough to keep the chill forever at the threshold. Their glow is barely light anymore, more memory than flame, yet every so often one ember flares gently, illuminating the curve of the nearest wooden post or the edge of a fur blanket, casting a soft golden blush that fades almost before you can be sure you saw it. The sleepers around you have fallen into the deepest level of rest, the kind that only comes in places wrapped tightly in storm and darkness. Their breathing is long, slow, unbroken, like the steady tide of a sheltered cove. Some breaths whistle faintly through parted lips, Others rise in deep hums from chests buried beneath layers of wool, but together they form a quiet, rhythmic chorus that fills the hall with a warmth no fire alone could ever create. One of the children sleeping close to the hearth sighs in their dreams, curling deeper into a heap of fur, and the movement sends a small ripple through the bedding, soft rustling that slides across the silence, like snow slipping gently from a branch. Somewhere behind you, an older man shifts, and lets out a low, contented grunt before settling again, and the sound blends seamlessly into the dark, thick air, becoming just another thread in the tapestry of nighttime safety. The animals behind the partition remain still, their bodies radiating a steady heat through the planks. A cow breathes out a long, warm huff that vibrates faintly through the wood like a slow drumbeat, and you feel that warmth seep into the hall, subtle but constant, blending with the gentle heat of the embers and the collective breath of the sleepers. The animal's warmth feels different, deeper, earthier, like a grounded heartbeat, rising from beneath the floor and settling into the bones of the house itself. Outside, the storm continues its quiet work, but even its movements have softened into something soothing. The wind no longer lashes or howls. It brushes along the roof in gentle strokes, shifting snow in slow cascades that sound like soft hands smoothing blankets. Every distant gust dulls into a whisper, the moment it meets the thick turf and piled drifts, and the blizzard's once fierce voice has softened into a kind of tired lullaby, a distant hum that blends with the steady breath of the longhouse. Your thoughts drift farther, loosening like threads unwinding from a spool, each one slower than the last. The images they form are soft and blurred, the round glow of a horn cup held near firelight, the pale shimmer of frost tracing the edges of a window frame, the curl of smoke from a torch carried through snow, the soft, heavy weight of wool cloaks hung to dry. None of these thoughts last long. They flicker, drift, and dissolve, leaving only a warm, formless calm behind them. The furs beneath you cradle your body perfectly now, their coarse fibers warmed into a soft, pliant cushion by hours of shared heat. When you shift slightly, the hides rustle just enough to remind you of their presence, of the layered, ancient comfort they offer, and then they settle again with a quiet sigh, moulding themselves to your shape as though they were woven for this very moment. A sleeper's hand grazes your arm for just an instant, a small, instinctive search for warmth in the dark, and you feel the faint, soothing heat of their skin even through layers of wool. The touch is brief, barely more than a brush, but it sinks into your awareness like a quiet confirmation that you are not alone, that every person in this room shares the same breath, the same shelter, the same heartbeat of warmth. Your eyelids close fully now, heavy and warm, and the darkness behind them feels thick and velvety, alive with the faint pulse of ember light and the steady rhythm of breath around you. The longhouse emits one final deep creak, a slow, satisfying shift of wood and turf and snow, like a giant settling itself more comfortably into sleep, and that sound settles over you like a hand smoothing a blanket. Then, in a single soft moment, you slip entirely into the deep, enveloping warmth of sleep, held safely by wool, by furs, by the breath of dozens, by the quiet patience of ancient timber, while the storm outside drifts and murmurs far away, unable to reach the sanctuary wrapped around you. The darkness inside the longhouse grows even softer now, thickening into a warm, velvety dusk that no longer feels like the absence of light, but like a presence all its own, a slow, gentle shadow that settles over every sleeping figure, cushioning thought and breath until everything blends into one quiet, living stillness. You float inside that stillness as though suspended in warm water, weightless and safe, every breath deepening the sense that the hall itself is carrying you through the night, like a great wooden cradle. The embers have dimmed to their faintest glow, little more than tiny red freckles scattered under the ash, yet the warmth they once kindled remains fully alive in the room. It lingers in the thick air, trapped by the low ceiling, the turf roof, the packed snow outside, and the soft press of many bodies breathing in unison. That warmth has taken on a dreamlike quality now, steady, slow, and absolutely certain, and you feel it sinking deeper into your bones with every long, quiet inhale. Someone nearby shifts again in their sleep, and their fur blanket brushes softly against yours, the sound as gentle as fabric sliding across skin. You can sense, without seeing, how everyone lies curled or stretched across their platforms, mothers with their children tucked close, elders pulled beneath the heaviest hides, younger men sprawled fully clothed in bundles of wool, dogs snuggled at their feet, and that imagined map of rest warms you almost as much as the fire ever did. It feels like being part of a single warm organism, each sleeper a heartbeat in a shared rhythm. From the animal pen comes a slow, deep breath, one of the cows releasing a sigh so long and warm it carries through the partition like a distant tide rolling across sand. The sound is grounding, earthy, and deeply comforting, reminding you that life here is layered, human breath above, animal warmth below, fire at the center, all woven into a single perfect cocoon. Even in their sleep, the animals contribute to the quiet miracle of survival unfolding inside this wooden shell. Outside, the storm has softened into near silence, not because it has ended, but because the snow has grown so thick, so deep, that it muffles its own voice. The wind's once fierce howl has turned into a long, velvety sigh sweeping across the drifts. Occasionally you hear a faint thump overhead, the soft collapse of a settled layer of snow sliding off the roof, and the sound is strangely soothing, like the world tucking itself in a little tighter around the long house. The rafters above you hold the last hints of ember light, their edges glowing faintly when one final spark rises from the hearth and fades in midair. The beams stretch upward in broad, protective arcs, their surfaces darkened by generations of smoke and time, so that in this dimness they resemble the ribs of a massive, slumbering creature curled around all of you. The house feels alive, not metaphorically but truly alive, in the way it holds heat, breathes smoke, sighs under snow, and embraces everyone beneath its shelter. Your thoughts drift again, becoming softer, slower, more fluid. They are no longer stories or memories or worries. They are warm impressions slipping through your mind like gentle waves. The orange glow of a torch flickering in the snow, the soft brush of a wool sleeve, the hum of a lullaby half remembered, the smell of juniper rising on heated air. Each image fades into the next, until thought itself dissolves, leaving only sensation, warmth, softness, the weight of rest pulling you downward. Your body grows heavier, limbs sinking deeper into the hides as though the furs themselves are slowly swallowing you into their warmth. You feel the weight of the blankets finishing their slow descent over you, molding perfectly to your shape. Your breath thickens with sleep. Your chest rises and falls in long, peaceful arcs, each one slower than the last, each one blending into the deep shared breath of the hall. Somewhere near your feet, one of the dogs sighs softly and shifts closer, pressing its warm flank against the edge of your bedding. The contact is light but soothing, a small creature seeking warmth the same way you are, the same way everyone in the hall is. That quiet, instinctive closeness feels like the final thread that ties you into the night's warm web. The longhouse emits one more deep wooden murmur, a soft creak that travels from one beam to another like a whisper passed through old friends, and the sound settles over the hall with a sense of gentle approval, as if the building itself recognizes that everyone inside has finally reached the deepest part of the night. And then, in a hush thick enough to feel, the last flicker of ember light fades, leaving you wrapped in a darkness that is not empty but full of breath, warmth, fur, wood, and centuries of peaceful winter nights. In that soft, endless dark, you surrender fully to sleep, warm, safe, and held within the quiet heart of a Viking winter dream. The night inside the longhouse has grown so deep, so perfectly settled, that it no longer feels like nighttime at all, but like a warm pocket hidden beneath the world, a place where the blizzard, the cold, and even time itself have no real authority. You drift within that pocket as though floating in a warm, slow-moving current, every breath pulling you further into a softness that covers your mind like thick snow falling on a quiet field. The embers in the hearth are barely alive now, tiny orange seeds glowing within a bed of grey, pulsing so faintly that you see their light only in hints, like the shadow of a heartbeat rather than the flame itself. But the heat they gave has lingered everywhere in the air, which feels thick and warm as a blanket, in the furs which have moulded entirely around your body, and in the shared presence of the sleepers around you, whose breath and closeness have become the real fire sustaining the hall through the dark. You can feel that shared warmth more clearly now that your other senses are dimming. The man to your left has a steady, deep breathing rhythm. A low inhale followed by a long exhale that brushes faintly across your shoulder every time the air shifts beneath the furs. The child farther away murmurs something unintelligible in a dream, just a tiny sound, high and soft, that is answered by the gentle rustle of a mother's hand pulling a hide more tightly around them. A pair of dogs curled near the doorway shift slightly, paws brushing straw in a faint rhythmic whisper. Even these small movements feel muted, softened by the haze of warmth that fills the hall. They blend together in a way that feels almost like music, subtle, slow, gentle, a lullaby made of breath and wool, and the steady pulse of life in a sleeping home. The animals behind the partition are fully at rest, their weight pressing into the straw with a deep, steady stillness that radiates warmth through the planks. One cow releases a slow, deep exhale that vibrates softly through the ground beneath you, the warmth of its breath rising into the air like a heavy, comforting sigh from the earth itself. You don't see the animals, you just feel the gentle presence of their warmth, like another layer of fur tucked around everyone. Outside, the storm has grown so quiet under its own snowfall that the world beyond the walls might as well not exist. The wind no longer howls or pushes. Now it hums, curling around the roof in long, soft strokes. Snow shifts down the slopes of the turf with faint, velvety sounds, as if the night sky itself is slowly rearranging blankets on the earth. The storm has become part of the silence, part of the sleep, part of the warmth. The rafters overhead hold the last hints of light, their edges faintly illuminated by the final ember glow that rises and fades like slow breathing. They arch above you in dark, gentle lines, each beam softened by centuries of soot into a deep, even black. In the dimness, they look like the ribs of an ancient creature slumbering above you, curled around the hall in a protective embrace. And somehow, that thought doesn't feel strange. It feels comforting. The house is alive in its own way. It watches. It breathes. It holds you. Your own thoughts, already slow, now drift apart entirely. They no longer form sentences or stories. They simply appear as warm impressions and fade. A memory of walking through snow at dusk, the way the fire looked earlier when the flames were still dancing, the weight of a cloak resting heavily on your shoulders, the soft sound of distant laughter that feels centuries away now. These impressions float like down feathers on a gentle breeze, drifting farther from awareness with each passing breath. Your eyelids fall heavier and heavier, sinking closed fully now, and the darkness behind them feels warm, thick, and endlessly soft. The furs beneath you cradle your body perfectly, their warmth pooling around your legs and shoulders, hugging your shape as though the hides themselves have softened into some half-living embrace made of memory and warmth. Somewhere in the hall, a sleeper shifts closer, the slightest brush of their blanket touching yours, and that tiny contact sends one last wave of reassurance through your mind. Not a thought, not a realization, just a feeling that you are safe, warm, part of something shared and ancient. The longhouse gives one last deep, sleepy groan, a low, settling sound that rolls through the timbers like a murmured goodnight. And with that final whisper of wood, the room seems to exhale fully, settling into its deepest, most peaceful stillness. And in that stillness, in that soft darkness warmed by breath and fur and centuries of winter wisdom, you let go completely, slipping into a deep, heavy, dream-rich sleep. that feels like sinking into the warm heart of the earth itself, untouched by cold, untouched by time, held in the gentle embrace of a Viking night. The longhouse seems to drift even deeper into a warmth so complete that it no longer feels like something around you, but something you are inside of, as though the entire world has shrunk to the size of this dim, smoky room, and every breath, every pulse, every quiet shift of weight exists only to rock you further into rest. The air is thick with the scent of wool, wood smoke, and packed earth, and it settles over you in slow, velvety waves, each one softer than the last, each one blurring the thin line between waking and dreaming, until that line disappears completely. The embers beneath the ash pulse so gently now that their glow seems to rise and fall with the breath of the room itself. Every few moments a tiny spark stirs, lifting a faint orange glow that brushes across the nearest firs like a soft fingertip before fading again into warm, ash-colored shadow. That tiny flicker is the night's last heartbeat of firelight, a final echo of the flames that once filled the hall, and even now, dim and quiet, it spills enough warmth to keep the cold from finding a single foothold inside these walls. A sleeper to your right curls deeper into their fur blanket, the soft scrape of hide against hide making a whispering sound like wind sliding across snow. Another person further away exhales through their nose, long and slow, the breath catching briefly in the smoky air before dissolving into it. The small sounds are comforting, not interruptions but confirmations that the hall is full of life, each breath adding a small thread of warmth to the woven blanket of the night. The animals behind the partition remain in a state of perfect heavy rest. You can feel them more than you can hear them. A slow, rhythmic hum of warmth moving through the straw, rising from their bodies in tides so steady and deep that they feel like part of the earth itself. Every so often one of the cows makes a quiet, low rumble in its throat, the sound so soft it seems to vibrate through the floor rather than through the air. It is an ancient sound, a sound made in a dozen winters exactly like this one, comforting, grounding, quietly alive. Outside, the storm has lost even the memory of violence. The wind has softened into long, wandering sighs that drift across the roof, pushing powdery snow down its curves with soft thumps and whispers. The world beyond the walls is now nothing but layered softness, snow falling on snow, wind brushing through drifts, silence folding over silence, the kind of quiet that can swallow entire valleys, the kind that allows a person to sleep more deeply than they ever thought possible. The rafters overhead melt into darkness, their soot-stained beams fading into the smoke until they become almost indistinguishable from the night itself. But you can still feel their presence, broad, curved, ancient, arcing above you like protective wings. The longhouse does not merely enclose you, it envelops you, shields you, settles its weight around you like a guardian that has watched over countless winter nights before this one. Your breath slows again, deeper, thicker, almost drifting. Each inhale pulls warm, earthy air into your lungs. Each exhale brushes warmly across your furs. The rhythm becomes hypnotic, echoing the soft, heavy breathing of everyone around you. Even your heartbeat begins to fall into that same slow cadence, the kind of rhythm that comes only when the body has surrendered fully to rest. Your thoughts soften into warm, shapeless impressions, glimpses of flickering light, memories of wool brushing your cheek, the sound of a lullaby that you can't quite place, the imagined glow of sunrise behind a curtain of snow. None of these thoughts hold their shape. They drift and fade before they can be understood, slipping into the same warm haze that fills the hall. A dog shifts near your feet, pressing its warm body a little closer to your bedding. Its fur brushes softly against your ankle, bringing with it a tiny pulse of heat that spreads slowly along your skin. The contact is gentle, instinctive, and it anchors you more deeply in the moment, reminding you that warmth here is not a single source, but many: fire, bodies, hides, animals, breath, all intertwined. Your eyelids flutter once, twice, then fall closed with a soft finality. Darkness fills them, warm and thick as fur, and the last traces of wakefulness dissolve like smoke rising into night air. The hall gives one more tired wooden sigh, a gentle creak passing from beam to beam, settling into a long exhale that feels almost like a lullaby sung in timbers. And then everything grows perfectly still, perfectly warm, perfectly quiet. You slip the final inch into sleep, deep, slow, and dream-heavy, cradled inside the ancient breath of the longhouse, wrapped in furs and silence, while outside the snow falls endlessly, softly, as if the whole world has chosen this moment to rest with you. And when morning finally begins to stir beyond the snowbound world, it does not arrive with light or colour or sound, but with the smallest shift in the longhouse's breath, a subtle lifting of darkness that feels more like a thought than a sunrise, the kind of gentle awakening that comes not from the sky, but from the rhythm of living beings easing themselves back toward consciousness. After a night wrapped in perfect warmth, you feel it first not in your eyes, but in your body, in the way the furs seem a little lighter across your chest, in the way the air carries the faintest suggestion of cold where before there was none, in the way your breath no longer sinks you deeper into sleep, but slowly starts to lift you back toward waking. Someone near the fire stretches beneath their blanket, the movement soft and slow like a ripple passing through calm water, and the sound pulls a faint memory of awareness through the room. Another sleeper sighs, a child shifts and curls closer to their mother. One of the dogs lets out a small groan as it uncurls from its warm nest, and little by little the longhouse begins to murmur again with the quiet stirrings of life returning after the storm. The animals behind the partition wake too, their breaths deepening, the soft rustle of straw growing louder as they shift their weight and shake the night from their limbs. Their warmth rises anew, mingling with the lingering heat of the embers and the breath of the people, filling the hall with a gentle mixture of scents, wool, smoke, earth, hay, that feels like the essence of survival itself. Outside, the storm has spent its fury, leaving behind a world muffled in deep white silence, and through the small vent in the roof a thin, cold thread of pale dawn steals into the hall, brushing the rafters with the faintest silver glow. It catches the edges of the soot-blackened beams and the curve of a horn cup, and for a moment the long house looks exactly as it must have looked for 1,000 winters, timeless, weathered, enduring, a cradle of warmth holding firm against the vast indifference of the northern cold. You rise slowly, feeling the stiffness of sleep in your limbs, the lingering warmth of furs against your skin, and as you sit up you realize that the night has changed you in some quiet, gentle way. You understand now what the Vikings understood instinctively. That warmth is not something you make alone. That survival in winter is not a solitary victory, but a shared act, a harmony of bodies and breath and fire and earth woven together under a wooden roof. You look around the hall as the others begin to wake, soft smiles forming in the dim light, murmured greetings traveling between them like the first birdsong of the day, and for a moment you feel part of something ancient and deeply human, a lineage of lives lived close to the fire, wrapped in furs, breathing the same smoky air through 1,000 storms. And as you stand brushing the last fragments of sleep from your eyes, the longhouse creaks once more, a low, satisfied sound, like an old friend stretching after a long, peaceful night. And you know the storm outside may come again, the winter may deepen, the nights may grow longer, but here inside this humble wooden sanctuary warmth will always find its way back into the world, carried in the breath of those who choose to endure it together. You step toward the door, touch the latch, and as the cold morning air brushes your face you take one last look at the glowing hush behind you, the furs, the embers, the slow smiles, the sleeping animals, and you feel a quiet peace settle into your chest, the kind that follows a night spent cradled in the heart of winter, safe, warm, and deeply, profoundly human. And then you step outside into the silence, the world bright and white and soft, the snow stretching endlessly beneath a pale new sky, and you carry with you the warmth of the longhouse, a warmth that will linger in your bones long after the wind has chilled your cheeks, because you have learned, as they once learned, that the cold is never truly conquered but patiently outlasted, one shared breath at a time.